James Cameron's Avatar films are a smorgasbord of eco-warrior science fiction nonsense and state-of-the-art CGI that really makes us go, wow, that's some great CGI. It's also widely derided amongst casual moviegoers. So let's take a look at the problem with Avatar. Okay, full transparency, I actually really enjoy Avatar and its sequel, The Way of Water. Surprise, this is a pro-Avatar video. I snuck it in on you. I think they're beautiful and technically revolutionary films that really push the boundaries of what can be done with the medium. They also represent massive ego trips for James Cameron, and I'm all about a good ego trip.
Now, where my fellow Heaven's Gate fans at?
However, there are those who disagree with me. The reasons why are well-trod ground, so let's just dig through them one by one. The first is the idea that Avatar is a ripoff of other Hollywood pictures like Dances with Wolves and Ferngully. Now, I'm gonna give a little more full disclosure here and tell you right now, this toxic dumping ground of a brain does not remember a single minute of Dances with Wolves. However, I do remember Ferngully, and well, I think the comparisons are dumb. Sure, we get a hero who changes size and winds up integrating himself into the culture of mysterious creatures who convince him to push back against the environmental devastation wrought by his peers. But guys, that's a tale as old as time. Beyond that very lenient plot comparison, there's also some big machines that cut down trees, which, again, cool, but not an idea branded by Ferngully. That's just how we treat forests, y'all. And not to get too far off the beaten path here, but what about the fact that Avatar represents the closest thing we've gotten yet to all those psychedelic sci-fi novels from the 70s? You know, the ones with alien creatures that probably couldn't exist in the real world and which basic makeup and costuming could never hope to achieve. There's basically John Carter and Avatar, and one of those properties doesn't feature blue cat people fucking with their ponytails. Sorry, it's just the Ferngully thing, man. It's such a lazy comparison, and it's seemingly the go-to for 99% of those critical of the franchise. Why not compare it to something that actually feels like a derivative, like Alan Dean Foster's 1975 novel Midworld? Cameron knows that book far more than he does Ferngully. But you know, let's ignore the fact that I really disagree with negative reviews, and let's assume for a moment that Avatar is just Ferngully in space. Fair enough, fine. It's still an insane achievement of visual effects, and it still posits a message that's pro-environment and anti-capitalist greed. Is that message particularly nuanced? No. But you know what other franchises espouse many of the same ideals with a similar level of nuance? The Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. Both depict a good and evil side with very little room for nuance between the two. There are aspects, sure. For example, Frodo's journey shows him consistently being driven to the brink of evil by the One Ring. And of course, the Star Wars prequels added some much derided nuance to the Jedi, but I'd argue we get a sufficient and comparative level of nuance from Avatar. Nuance, 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 nuance. How many times can I say it in one video? Most notable is Jake Sully essentially being responsible for the attack on the Tree of Souls and the scores of scientists who aid the Na'vi. In Way of Water, there's the Tulkun Payakan, who has been exiled from his pod due to his attempt at avenging his mother's death at the hands of the RDA. In that same movie, we also see that Na'vi kids can be just as big a jerks as human kids. Okay, so the Ferngully in space idea might be a tad silly, but one criticism that's hard to ignore is the idea of the white savior narrative, which Avatar certainly employs. This one is hard to argue against. After all, the Na'vi are depicted essentially as stand-ins for real-life indigenous peoples, and they are saved by noted white boy Jake Sully, who has a preternatural ability to succeed at just about anything he has to in order to integrate with the Na'vi. However, I do think it's a bit more complicated than that. As some fans have pointed out, the real heroes of the first Avatar are Neytiri and Eywa, the entity that binds all life on Pandora. Neytiri saves Jake multiple times and teaches him everything he has to learn to become part of her clan. And in the end, even Jake isn't able to save the Na'vi. Instead, Eywa does most of the legwork by deploying Pandoran wildlife to overwhelm the RDA's military contractors. There's also the fact that Jake's integration into the Na'vi culture is a lot more two-sided than is often given credit. Jake learns as much, if not more, from the Na'vi than they learn from him, and in the end, he's just as much a tool of Eywa as he is a self-sustaining warrior. He's also explicitly saved by the Na'vi and finds a new home and way of life by joining them. At the beginning of the story, he's a paraplegic jarhead going by the orders of an evil corporation, and by the end, he's literally transferred his mind into a new body and dedicated the rest of his life to defending the Na'vi. There's definitely a laziness to some of the storytelling, don't get me wrong. The way that Jake is able to win back over the Na'vi after betraying them is particularly frustrating. But beyond that, the idea of Jake Sully as a white savior, to me, is just kind of beyond the point. And sure, I'm a white guy saying this. Shocking. So pinch of salt and all that, but Avatar is a film less about a white man saving indigenous people and more about an indigenous people saving a handicapped man who is able to see the beauty of their culture without preconceived notions. He's essentially a broken blank slate who is able to experience a godlike entity, Ewa, and through that and a little ponytail hanky-panky is able to find a new meaning for his life. Another element that naysayers have a hard time with is just the very idea of unobtanium. The criticism here is pretty simple. It's a dumb name. I mean, come on. What kind of idiot would call a rare mineral unobtanium? What a dumb sack of what? Oh, what's that? It's a real term dating back to the 1950s, and it's used by engineers to describe materials that really exist but are difficult to obtain? Yowza. Sorry, sarcasm isn't my strong suit. The point here is pretty simple. Unobtanium isn't an invention of James Cameron, nor is it derived from Avatar. It was also used in the 2003 film The Core, but it's been around for decades, and in the context of the film, seems as appropriate a name as any for a mineral that's as rare and challenging to obtain as, well, unobtanium. If anything, an inherent problem with Avatar 2 is that it dispenses with unobtanium entirely. Unless I'm misremembering, it's not even mentioned once over the course of the film's 3 hours, which is too bad because it's a perfectly solid MacGuffin to keep the plot speeding along. The substitution with alien whale brain goo in the sequel, however, is a strong replacement. It's about as subtle as unobtanium, perhaps less so since it turns into a critique of whaling through, well, whaling. But it's much more emotionally connected to the audience and presents us with a grotesque and horrifying action for the villains to perpetrate. Taking us back for a moment, the whole whale plot in Avatar: The Way of Water, it does a lot to add nuance to the franchise, most of all through the character of Dr. Ian Garvin, as portrayed by Jermaine Clement. He's a lot like the other scientists introduced in the first film, but with a more pessimistic bent. He's a bad guy, but one with a moral grayness due to his intentions and worldview, which would be all hunky-dory if it weren't for his willingness to be used by the RDA in the hunting of Tulkun. He's also responsible for the discovery of the brain goo called Amrita, which just so happens to stop human aging. And he's not terribly happy about that fact. And finally, we have to talk about the giant blue elephant in the room, Na'vi nudity. Where are the nipples at? We know that Na'vi dudes don't have nipples, and that avatars do. But have you ever noticed that all the lady Na'vi nipples are conspicuously hidden? What are they hiding? And what about, the downstairs area? Oh no. Is it just like that Harry Partridge video, or is there something else going on down there? The people want to know. And the people is me. Finally, I'd just like to say that the problem with Avatar at the end of the day is there's not enough Avatar. Give me more, Uncle Jim. Give me more. Feed me like a baby bird.
Please, sir. I want some more.
Anyway, what do you think? Do you hate Avatar and think it has more problems than one big four-headed doofus can count? Or do you agree with my corporate musings? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching ScreenRant.